Well, a very happy Wednesday evening. Very glad to be with you tonight. This is a beginning ham radio class. Well, it's actually the end, or close to the end of the beginning. We're teaching the technician class, which is the beginning level of amateur radio licensing in the United States. And yes, ham radio still is a thing. It's a lot of fun. And so if you're just joining us or just stumbled upon us, there's a playlist here on the YouTube channel, W4EEY. Go look for it, the technician class, and you can start at chapter 1, work your way through chapter 1 of this book, if you take the laptop, Bruce, thank you. Tonight, actually, though, we're going to be doing chapter 9. It's the last chapter in the book. You made it. I know when you first got the book, and especially if you don't have an electronics background or you're leafing through it, you're going, I don't know if I can understand any of this stuff. But I think you've surprised yourself. Still, there may be some fuzzy areas. That's completely normal. Don't let that bother you. But you've made it to the end of the book, to the last chapter, and with a little further study and doing some practice tests, we'll get you there so you can take your exam. Come on back to me for just a second, Bruce. So you get your amateur radio license by taking a 35-question multiple choice test. Local amateur radio clubs typically give the test in your area. And I know there's a group from the Greenville, South Carolina area who are planning on taking their exams this coming Saturday, the third Saturday of the month, at the Red Cross building in Greenville, 940 Grove Road. I won't be there, but my partner in crime, Dave Ivey, will be there. Dave and I teach the general and extra class tests together. So you can say hi to Dave for me. You're going to do great. So just hang in there. We're almost done, and come on back to the laptop if you would. There's my pictorial for that. And the thing is that amateur radio, even though we've done a lot of studying and a lot of learning, is just a fun endeavor, fun building a station, getting on the air, getting involved with local ham clubs, helping with public service, with activities, communications for events and things like that. Amateur radio is fun, and it's also an adventure. You never thought about ham radio as being an adventure, right? But it is, because if you look at the definition, it's an unusual and exciting, typically hazardous experience or activity. Well, what's so hazardous about sitting behind your radios and pushing the buttons? Nice ham shack there. Well, It's the typically hazardous part that we're going to deal with tonight. It's Chapter 9 on safety. And so we want you to enjoy the hobby and have fun, but we want you also to stay safe because ham radio is definitely an adventure. All right, so let's start. What we're going to do tonight is go through Chapter 9, the various sections in that. Then we'll take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back, and together as a group we'll take a 35-question practice test together. You'll grade your own paper, you'll keep your own score, you don't have to tell me about it, but you'll see how you're doing, see where your strengths and weaknesses are, and I'll tell you some more about other tests that you can take as well. So let's get started with electrical safety. Something we don't think about, but charging batteries, especially lead-acid batteries, can be problematic. When you charge them at high currents or even discharge them sometimes at high currents, hydrogen gas can be emitted from the battery. It's a natural chemical thing that happens. And if you're in a motor vehicle and you're driving down the road, it doesn't make any difference, but it is flammable. So just be aware that charging lead-acid batteries creates flammable hydrogen gas. Lead-acid batteries store energy in a chemical way inside the battery, and there's a lot of energy in that battery. It can turn over the engine on your car. So just think about these big long wrenches there on the left and the open terminals on the battery on the top there. You do not want to drop a metal wrench across the battery terminals of a lead-acid battery because an instant inrush of current will flow through the wrench, gas, explosions, fire, no good. So just keep that in mind, that be careful when working around lead-acid batteries because of this. Now, batteries, power supplies, especially those 30 volts and above, can be potentially harmful, even lethal. And both alternating current and direct current can be problematic. Now, electrical current, it heats tissue in the body. That's one of the things that it does. It can also disrupt cell function in the body. And you've seen in the movies and whatnot, it can cause muscle contractions that prevent you from letting go. So that's why if you see somebody who's been electrocuted, don't run over to grab them to pull them off. Get something non-conductive and kind of lever them away, because you don't want to be part of the shock hazard yourself. Keep that in mind. Now, when I talk about shock hazard, and I've almost pulled this from the presentation, but okay, here goes. Back in the day, when I grew up and studying electronics in our Electronics Explorer post, we did some things that OSHA would be a little hesitant about. Ever cook a hot dog with AC power? You stick a couple of forks in the ends, and then you hook up an AC cheater cord to one to each, and then you plug it in the wall. And pretty soon that hot dog is getting hot and smoking. No, that's not the way you want to cook a hot dog anymore. And the point I'm making is I don't want you to become the cooked hot dog. So just use common sense and be careful when working around electrical circuits. When you're working around electrical circuits, did you know that the colors of the wires have meaning? They're called color codes. And more importantly, the color codes between electrical circuits and electronics are different. It took me a while to kind of figure this one out. So a standard in the United States 120 volt AC outlet looks like this, and there are 3 wires that go to the outlet. The black wire is what we call the hot wire. The black wire is the one that is the source of the electrical energy. The white wire is the neutral, or the return, where the energy has to flow through the load and back to the source. So the white wire is the return. And then the green wire is an electrical safety ground. So for electrical circuits, black is hot. In electronics, however, black is generally considered to be a ground lead. Red is generally the positive voltage lead. And so if you're moving between those two worlds, just keep that in mind. Now, we have those outlets that we just saw. We also have some specialized outlets called ground fault circuit interrupters. And they're specialized units that actually measure the current that is flowing through the black wire out to the load, out to whatever you've got plugged in. And then it's measuring the current that's coming back on the white or the neutral lead, and those should be equal, exactly equal. If they're not exactly equal, then the ground fault circuit interrupter knows that, hey, current's going someplace where it shouldn't go, like maybe through you to the ground on your kitchen sink. Got your hands on the toaster there. When it senses that imbalance, it says something's not right, and it'll immediately trip the circuit. They're very fast. That's why codes, local building codes and local electrical codes, typically require ground fault circuit interrupters any place where you might inadvertently be touching a ground circuit, like in your kitchen or in the bathroom where there's plumbing. So that's why we have GFCIs, and they are lifesavers and they are recommended. However, as with everything, there's good and there's bad. And this is a few years ago, but the American Radio Relay League had an article on ground fault circuit interrupters and some that were problematic with working with amateur radio. And it is possible that some GFCIs, when you transmit, they're not very well shielded or filtered, and they could trip off. Likewise, also some GFCIs will generate radio frequency interference. So on your receivers, you'll hear noise. It could possibly be coming from a GFCI. So here's a URL to an article from the ARRL on these devices, and just be aware of that. But highly recommend GFCIs and it's required by code in many locales. So we talked about the safety ground. The safety ground in an AC outlet is there to make sure that there is always a ground path back, just to protect human life. Well, there's different kinds of grounds. Electrical safety ground, that's what we just talked about, and local electrical code supply. And that's the other thing, is that, okay, there's the National Electrical Code in the United States. It's a big, thick series of books. But then the local electrical code, they may adopt the NEC in all or in part, or they may have their own special provisions, and always local electrical codes rule. So no matter wherever you are, whatever is local to you, that's what you have to follow. So that's one kind of ground, safety ground. Lightning protection is another type of grounding. And then finally, it's kind of a nebulous term, RF signal ground. It's something that we use in conjunction with our amateur radio station to keep things at a common potential and at ground potential. And most amateur radio equipment, if it plugs in the wall, if it's not 12-volt equipment, is going to come with a 3-wire cord. And let me turn on my little laser pointer here. So one of these is the black or the hot lead. One of these is the white or the neutral lead. I may have got that backwards there. But this is the electrical safety ground, the 3rd wire. Don't use adapters, or don't take wire cutters and cut that off. That serves a purpose to keep you safe. So just keep that in mind. It doesn't really help that much, though, with radio frequency signal ground. That's when we have to bond our equipment together. It's a good practice to keep all of our electronics in the ham shack at the same radio potential, signal potential, and also helps with the grounding for lightning as well. So that's bonding equipment together using either, this is known as flat copper strap, or flexible braid. Now, flexible braid is not good for use outside because it'll rust and lose, it'll oxidize and lose connectivity. But flat copper strap is the best bonding, or large gauge wire can also be used. And here's more information at this URL. At first, you're probably going to be operating using handy talkies or maybe mobile radios from VHF and UHF. But one of these days, you might want to advance into the general class and operate on HF. And you might then say, I'd like to get higher power levels. My radio is a 100-watt radio, but I want to get an amplifier. So here is a vacuum tube high power amplifier, legal limit amplifier. This amplifier, in order to have the tube operate, requires about 3,000 volts DC on the plate of the tube. Well, okay, that's hazardous, definitely. And so with the chassis here of the amplifier, you look over at the arrow here, you can barely see it there. It's this mechanism right here. It's a safety switch. We called it an interlock switch. So when the cabinet is down on the amplifier will work. But if you open up the cabinet and take the cabinet top off, the amplifier will shut down. That's a safety provision. Just know that equipment high voltage interlocks are there for your protection. If you have to do service on the amplifier, you can bypass the interlocks, but you do it knowingly. It's not inadvertent that you're pulling the cabinet off and sticking your hands in something like that. That's a high voltage interlock on equipment. 100-watt radios don't need it, but the high voltage amplifiers certainly do. We mentioned lightning protection. And what it is actually to try to discharge, hopefully slowly, any static buildup in the atmosphere, number one. That's one of the ways that lightning rods work, is to have a small trickle current come down to ground. The other is if lightning is going to hit it, well, okay, direct the path of the lightning strike. And if you're going to have a lightning strike, you want to make sure that the connections are all tight, clean, and are short and direct as possible. You want to avoid sharp bends in grounds for lightning protection. Lightning doesn't travel at right angles. It's plasma energy, and as it's traveling down the wire, if it comes to a right angle, it's going to go fly off into space and maybe hit something. Your radio equipment, your stereo system, whatever the path that it's taking. So make sure that if you have to bend it, make it sure it's a gradual bend so the plasma energy of a lightning strike can follow it. And also, always follow your local electrical code. My own experience with lightning is God forbid, I've never had a direct lightning strike on my station. I've had a lot of nearby lightning strikes, though, that has affected telephone equipment. My DSL modem at my own old residence used to go out every time we'd had a thunderstorm. So just be aware of the various paths that lightning might find its way into your house, and if you can, take some precautions against that. One of the ways it could come in is on the transmission line from your antennas. And in some cases, you can't disconnect the antennas readily, so we use what are known as lightning arresters. There are these devices from Polyphaser or Alpha Delta or a bunch of different manufacturers that make them here. And the antenna transmission line can be connected here, and your radio equipment here on the other side. And this provides a way to bond and ground, and there's an element inside here that will short out should there be a high voltage spike. Where you want to install these are on the outside of your ham shack, on an outside wall to a grounded plate or strap, flat copper strap, that is connected to one or more ground rods down below. So these are our lightning arresters, highly recommended for antenna connections for your amateur radio gear. Oh, you're adventurous, you're going to put up a tower? Okay. Well, if you put up an antenna tower, whether it be 30 feet tall or 100 feet tall, you want to have a ground rod for each tower leg of the tower. So here we have a three-legged tower, And we've got 4. Okay, all right, we did a little bit extra. But you've got a flat copper strap running out to, and this is CAD welded here, to an 8-foot ground rod that is driven down into the ground. And there's very likely a copper ring of a flat copper strap or copper cable that rings the bottom of the tower to have all of these ground rods bonded together. Again, we're going to avoid sharp corners. Want to be as short and direct as possible. It's not so common anymore, but back in the day we used to build our own equipment. The rule was that AC powered equipment should always have a fuse, and the fuse must be located in the black wire. If it's AC powered, you want the fuse to be where the power is coming into the device, not on the return, but on the black wire, the source of power coming from the panel or from the outlet. And if you're building equipment or if you've got equipment, keep in mind, they won't look like this. These are pretty old and ugly. These are oil-filled capacitors. But charged capacitors, especially capacitors in a DC power supply, when you turn on the power supply, they will put an electrical charge on the capacitors. And even when you remove power, the capacitor is kind of like a battery, and they will store the charge. Okay, I told you my story about the hot dog and cooking the hot dog. Well, okay, here's another story from electronics class. Back in high school, we were given, component parts and things to do, and on our bench we had a big bench power supply that could run up to 400 volts. Cool. Oh, here's a 400 volt electrolytic capacitor. If I connect it up to the power supply and turn the power supply on, it charges the capacitor up to 400 volts. And then you take it away from the power supply and you find your friend and say, "Hey, Bruce, here, catch." Oh, there we are. Here, catch. Oh, we got people that way. Don't be silly like that, but just be aware that capacitors like this can store a voltage on them, and in big cases you actually have to physically discharge them with a shorting wire before you work on it. Most of the time the circuits are designed so that when you remove the power, the voltage is discharged automatically, but just be aware that this exists. Here we are ready for some questions. So let's read these and see what we think. So which of the following is a safety hazard of a 12-volt storage battery?
Bravo.
Yeah, you don't want to drop that big wrench across the terminals, because if you do, it's going to get nasty real quick. So what health hazard is presented by electrical current flowing through the body? Read carefully.
Delta.
You know my trick. Yes, it may cause injury by heating tissue. It may disrupt the electrical functions of cells. It may cause involuntary muscle contractions, all of those. And in the United States, what circuit does black wire insulation indicate in a 3-wire 120 volt cable?
Bravo.
Yes, what we call the hot wire. It's the source of power coming from the panel. The black. And what is a good way to guard against electrical shock at your station?
Delta.
Yes, delta. You use 3-wire cords, connect all AC powered station equipment to a common safety ground, and install mechanical interlocks like on that amplifier and high voltage circuits, so all of those choices. And why should a lightning arrestor be installed in a coaxial feed line? Or where should the lightning arrestor be installed?
Delta.
Yep, you want it on the outside, on a grounded panel, a copper plate, or a strap near where the feed lines are entering the building. So where should a fuse or circuit breaker be installed in a 120 volt AC powered circuit?
Alpha.
Yeah, in series with the hot conductor. And what should be done to all external ground rods or earth connections?
Charlie.
It may be required by local electrical code. Yes, you want to bond them together with heavy wire or conductive straps so your grounds are all at the same electrical potential. And what hazard exists in a power supply immediately after turning it off?
Delta.
Here, catch, yeah, charged capacitors. And which of the following is good practice when installing ground wires on a tower for lightning protection?
Charlie.
Yes, make sure that the connections are short and direct. You don't want right angles. So which of the following is true when installing grounding conductors used for lightning protection?
Charlie.
Yeah, remember they'll ask the same question in different ways. You won't get both of those questions. You might get one or the other. So yeah, sharp bends should be or must be avoided. So which of the following establishes grounding requirements for an amateur radio tower or antenna?
Bravo.
Yeah, always local electrical codes rule. All right, very good. Section 9.2 now, managing RF, or radio frequency energy, in your station. And it's an interesting fact that for radio frequency current, we've got this big copper wire, all right? Radio frequency current doesn't go through the center of the wire. DC and low frequency AC current, 60 cycle power, does use all of the conductor of a wire. But for radio frequency energy, especially the higher and higher you go in frequency, something called skin effect takes place, where the current carrying electrons are on the outside of the wire. And the inner part of the wire here doesn't carry any current at all. That's known as the skin effect. And it's even more predominant the higher in frequency you go, which is one of the reasons why we say that the best grounding conductor is flat copper strap, because it has a lot of surface area. And so radio frequency current easily passes on the sides of flat copper strap. And so it has very low inductance, and it's the best thing you can get for grounding. Here's a photo from Georgia Copper. When I called them about a year ago and said, I want to get some strap, they said, we're moving to Louisiana. But they still call Georgia Copper. I don't understand, but okay. All right, let's move on. You've all been in the basketball game at the high school, and the PA system, somebody's turned up the gain on the PA, and all of a sudden it starts howling. That's audio feedback. That's a feedback loop from the speaker of the PA system into a microphone that's open someplace, going into a mixer, to the amplifier, to the speaker, all right? That's audio feedback. Radio frequency can also feed back. If you have your station, here's a block diagram of the station with an RF oscillator to put you on a certain frequency, balanced modulator. Okay, this means we're doing single sideband. Okay, here's a microphone connected to an audio frequency amplifier going into the balanced mixer. Okay, a sideband filter, so this is a single sideband transmitter, power amplifier, and out to an antenna. And here the energy is being radiated from the antenna, and some of that energy can make its way back not as acoustic energy into the microphone, but as electrical energy into the cable. The cable is acting as an antenna, and that's known as RF feedback. And if you have that at your station, the result will be garbled speech. Your speech will suddenly start to sound fuzzy and unclear. And people will comment. You've got RF in your microphone, or you've got raspy audio or whatnot. And the solution is something as simple as ferrites. Ferrite devices, this is a snap-on unit here that you can put on a microphone cord, for example. It just goes around the cable, and it provides a way to block currents on the outside of even a shielded cable. There's currents known as common mode currents that can travel through there. And this provides an inductive reactance to block current flow and can eliminate that RF feedback, or that fuzzy or garbled speech. Oh, wow. Moving right along, more questions. Which of the following conductors is preferred for bonding at RF?
Delta.
Flat copper strap, because of the surface area. And what is a symptom of RF feedback in a transmitter or transceiver?
Charlie.
Yeah, garbled, distorted, or unintelligible voice. Not so hard. All right, we're moving right along. So you could say that RF feedback is a kind of RF interference, and it's a broad subject. Sorry. The first question to be answered, if somebody is complaining about, hey, I think your station is interfering with my TV or my stereo or whatever it might be, find out, is your own equipment being interfered with? Every time I tune into channel 4, and you are on that station, well, okay, tune your TV over to channel 4 and see, is it affected? Thus, if you're getting the same problem, well, definitely then you've got an issue that you need to look at your transmitter. If your equipment's not being affected, though, it might suggest a problem with the other person's equipment, which you can still help them with. So the causes of interference to other people can be transmitter harmonics. You're transmitting on, let's say, the 20 meter band, 14 megahertz. The second harmonic of 14 megahertz is 28 megahertz times 2. The third harmonic would be 3 times 14. Those harmonic energies could be interfering with the other receiver or TV or whatever. Spurious emissions, these are emissions that are not harmonically related, but they also come out of your transmitter at various other frequencies. Or just the fact that you're transmitting on any frequency at all, it's called fundamental overload. One thing you can do on your transmitter side is to install one of these, a low-pass filter. This one is from MFJ, which actually is a ham radio company that just recently closed their doors after like 40 some odd years in business. I think 1972 they were open, but they've closed now. But this was one of their low-pass filters, which has a 30 megahertz top frequency, so that all of the VHF frequencies for television or FM or whatnot are protected. So all of the harmonics or spurious outputs that you might have, which you shouldn't have, but you might, would be blocked by this low-pass filter on your transmitter. Now, the last thing I mentioned, fundamental overload, that's just when a radio or other device is in the presence of a high RF field. Well, there's not a lot you can do with that anymore, because it used to be radios were built with a lot of filtering on the front end to make sure that they only received the frequency ranges that they were designed to receive. But that cost money, and people were concerned about costs. So a lot of that stuff went away. And so now, if you get an inexpensive radio, it might just be overloaded by the presence of RF energy on another widely dispersed frequency. That's called front-end overload. There's not much you can do other than get a different radio in this case. So just be aware of that. You will hear people still have landline telephones and say, hey, I'm receiving, garbled speech on my telephone. Well, you can still buy filters. You can put these on the telephone line in the affected person's, wherever the telephone unit is, and it's capacitors and inductors that will block the RF energy coming from your transmitter. Likewise, if say, hey, my TV is screwing up every time you transmit, well, there are radio frequency interference filters that you can put on their televisions to help block your energy from your transmitters, but allow through the TV signals. All right, come back to me just for a second. Here's the big tip of the day, though. And this is going to be true at your house and at your neighbor's house. The number one cause of bad TV reception, whether they have cable or whether they're using off-air, bad F connectors. These guys, they're not waterproof. And especially if they're outside in the rain or whatnot, they will corrode. And the ground connections to the connector will come loose. Bad F connectors are the number one cause of trouble. And you call your cable TV techs, they'll tell you the same thing. The first thing they'll do is look at all of your connections and try to eliminate as many of them as they possibly can with new cables, especially if you've got splitters and things like that, because that's where problems come up. So F connectors are one of the things you got to look at. So that was interference from you. That's one kind of radio frequency interference. Another kind is interference to you. If something at your neighbor's house is interfering with your ham radio reception, for example, well, the things you do, you work with your neighbor to identify, if you can, the offending device. Politely inform your neighbor about the rules that prohibit the use of devices that cause interference. And also make sure that your station meets the standards of good amateur and engineering practice. But we are a licensed radio service by the FCC. We have rules and regulations, but we are a protected service. And unlicensed devices, known as Part 15 devices, have no protection. And so if it's one of these devices that happens to be interfering with you, you have some legal rights to have the problem remedied. All right, what if your radio, let's say it's a 2-meter VHF radio, has a problem with fundamental overload coming from a local FM broadcaster? What do? Well, you may have to modify the radio so that the receive path inside your radio has one of these installed. It's called a band stop filter. And it's designed to, in this case, block all broadcast FM signals coming through your receive path into your radio. And if you install one of these, then that problem of fundamental overload on your radio from an FM broadcaster will be eliminated. So just be aware that these specialized filters do exist. And when you can, use shielded cable for your connections, for audio, even for DC power, because shielded wire prevents signal intrusion into cables or from cables. And if you're going to use Ethernet cable, shielded Ethernet cable is much better because you'll cause less interference to the local area network, and the local area network will cause less interference to you. Shielding is helpful. Okay, more questions. Which of the following is a reason to use shielded wire?
Charlie.
Yep, to prevent coupling of unwanted signals to or from the wire. And what would cause a broadcast AM or FM radio to receive an amateur radio transmission unintentionally?
Alpha.
Yeah, here we're talking about fundamental overload, one of those what I call cheap Chinese radios, the receiver is unable to reject strong signals outside the AM or FM band. The Chinese could build some really great radios, but they would be more expensive and require additional circuitry. So which of the following can cause radio frequency interference?
Delta.
Yep, all of those. Fundamental overload, harmonics, spurious emissions. So which of the following could you use to cure distorted audio caused by RF current on the shield of a microphone cable?
Delta.
Yeah, that's the RF feedback can be blocked by a ferrite choke. And how can fundamental overload of a non-amateur radio or TV by an amateur signal be reduced or eliminated?
Alpha.
You have to add filtering because it's not built into the TV, so you block the amateur signal at the TV with a filter that filters out the ham bands. So yeah, you can install one of these RFI filters. And which of the following actions should you take if a neighbor tells you that your station's transmissions are interfering with their radio or TV reception?
Alpha.
Yeah, check your own equipment first. Confirm. If you've got problems with your own, then likely your station has an issue that needs to be dealt with. Call an Elmer or a friend to come on over and help you diagnose what's going on. If your own TV, though, is clear, then you might help your neighbor by installing a filter or checking their F connectors, for example. So which of the following can reduce overload of a VHF transceiver by a nearby commercial FM station?
Delta.
Yeah, installing one of those little boards I showed you there, it has to be inside the radio in the receive path, but installing a band reject filter. And the band in this case is the FM broadcast band. All right, what should you do if something in a neighbor's home is causing harmful interference to your amateur station?
Delta.
Delta.
Yeah, Delta. Work with your neighbor. Yeah, okay. Politely inform your neighbor that rules prohibit the use of devices that cause interference, and make sure your station meets standards of good amateur practice, because you don't want it to come back and bite you. All right, all of those choices. So what should be the first step to resolve non-fiber optic cable TV interference caused by your amateur radio transmission? What's the number one problem?
Alpha.
Yeah, Delta. Be sure that all of the coaxial connectors, the F connectors, are installed properly. All right. RF exposure. So come back to me just for a second, Bruce. So this is something that amateur radio operators did not have to deal with up until just a few years ago. But broadcasters definitely had to deal with this issue of radio frequency exposure, exposure to radio frequency energy. And it's much like the energy that comes from, now you got to think back to the olden days, to the old incandescent light bulbs. Remember those? If you had a 100-watt light bulb in a lamp fixture, well, consider the heat from that. If you go back to the laptop for a second, if you would, Bruce, there we go. So if you put your hand, a few feet away from the light bulb, it's no problem whatsoever. But the closer and closer you put your hand up to that light bulb, you can start to feel the heat. And if you were to put your hand on the light bulb, well, you would definitely feel the heat. You'd be burned. The 100-watt light bulbs got really hot. Well, consider the light bulb as an analogy for your antenna. And energy from your antenna is much the same. And the human body absorbs radio frequency energy differently. It varies with frequency, the frequency of operation. And so there's a table, I believe it's in your book, and it's also available online, of maximum permissible exposure based on the human body's RF energy absorption. And the graph here is a power density over here and frequency in megahertz on the horizontal scale. And so for lower frequencies, below 3 megahertz, for example, the power density that we're allowed to be exposed to is fairly high. But as we move toward the VHF, 50 megahertz up to 300 megahertz, the power density level goes down. This is the area that the human body is the most susceptible to having issues with. VHF, 50 megahertz and 2 meters are the bands that we have to be most concerned with. And then it moderates and goes back up as we go higher in frequency. So maximum permissible exposure. And so with our amateur radio stations, we need to keep this in mind. And we need to do an evaluation at our station to make sure that the power levels and the frequencies that we are using are not going to cause hazards to our friends and families or just bystanders. And so we do the evaluation one of 3 ways. You can do it by calculations based on the FCC's Office of Engineering Technology Bulletin 65, and I'll give you a URL here in a second. Or what most hams do is by calculation based on computer modeling. Ooh, that sounds fancy. It's really a website or websites you can use. And you can, by measurement of field strength, using calibrated equipment. And I forgot to bring it up, but I actually have a calibrated field strength meter and an antenna that can be used for direct measurements. And that's what we used to use overseas at the Voice of America. We had this equipment that because we were operating at really high power levels. Transmitters at 250,000 or 500,000 watts in the shortwave bands with antennas with 100 times power gain. So we definitely had to pay attention to this. And if we had, that's why we had stations that were on 2,000 acres, because we didn't need all that land except to keep other people away and out of the hazard areas, because we did not want to cause any problems. So hams have to do this now as well. And here's the URL to the FCC bulletin. It's governmentese. It's 84 pages long. You probably don't want to use this as your basis. But inside the book, if you look, they've got the same chart, just kind of laid out a little bit differently. But again, VHF, the 6 meter and the 2 meter bands, 50 megahertz and 144 megahertz, are the problem areas. Now, up until about 2 years ago, we used to be exempt from evaluations if we maintained power levels below what is listed here on the table. That's not the case anymore. We must do the evaluations, but it is the table is informative because it corresponds to what we just saw on the chart. The VHF is the most sensitive area. Now, your RF exposure evaluation does not have to be a formal written report. It could be a notation noting that an evaluation was conducted and by what method. And if you use an online calculator, what I would say is print out the results, just put them in a file. Okay, online calculator, here's one. The American Radio Relay League's RF exposure calculator is at this URL, and you put in details of your station, the frequencies of operation, the kinds of antennas. If you know the antenna gain, great. If not, it'll put in some models for you. And when you're all done, you just hit enter, and boom, it'll tell you the safe distance away from antennas. And then you need to evaluate. You need to look around and say, are there any people that would be in this area that could cause problems? So this is one. Another one I like is the one from the Lake Washington Ham Club. Again, it's the same sort of thing. You put in the information. This is one of the reasons people ask me sometimes, well, can I put an antenna up in my attic? You can. it's going to receive noise from your house. That's number one, so that's interference. But then you have to really look at the permissible exposure to your family that you might be exposing them to using one of these calculators. And when do you evaluate? Well, when you're first building your station for sure, and then when you make any changes to your station, especially if you increase power or you change your antenna types. And radiation energy from antennas is non-ionizing radiation, but the same kind of skills that are used for ionizing radiation, radioactivity, time, distance, and shielding can all be employed with radio frequency energy. So if you can reduce the exposure time, okay, that's good. If you can move antennas away from people, that's distance, okay, that's good. Or you can limit access, shield people from getting close to the antenna. And that can be as simple as putting a fence up to limit access so that folks can't get closer than 10, 15 feet away from your antenna. You do not want somebody to be able to walk up to your antenna and stick their hands on it, because what happens is an RF burn. And it's, when you're transmitting the radio frequency energy, it's a very painful kind of burn. I've had them, unfortunately, and it's a very long-lasting thing. Don't want to gross anybody out, but RF burns are not to be toyed with. So this is you considering your station and your antenna. It may be as simple as pointing your antenna away from your neighbor's house. If your calculations say that, oops, that's not going to work, well, you just may have to put limits on where your antenna can be positioned. Now, I mentioned that radio frequency energy is what is known as non-ionizing radiation. That means it does not cause genetic damage. The frequency of light is the dividing line. Above the frequency of light is ionizing radiation, below is non-ionizing. But all the same rules apply. The square law rule, if you double the distance away from a source of energy, the energy goes down by a factor of 4. That's called the square law. So distance, shielding, and time. And light is the border, as I mentioned. One of the simplest things to keep in mind too is I mentioned that broadcasters have had to deal with this for ever, because broadcasters are transmitting all the time. I mean, 100%. That's you turn the transmitter on and it stays on. In many cases 24 hours a day. Well, hams are not that way. We're listening a lot of the time and we're transmitting some of the time. So you have to take in consideration the duty factor. How often are you transmitting? All right, and then you have to consider the mode of operation. FM and radio teletype are what we call 100% duty modes, meaning that they're full power for the time that they're transmitting. Amplitude modulated signals like single sideband AM or CW are 50% or less because of the level of modulation is going up and down and up and down. The energy is going up and down. So all of these things can factor in to the limits. So if you look at the power density limits on that chart, well, they're established for full-time transmission. But if your transmission duty cycle is less than 100%, then the allowable power density increases. For example, if your transmit duty cycle is 50%, then the allowable power density is doubled. So just keep that in mind. That's one of the factors so that we have to consider. And the online calculators will ask, what mode of operation are you going to use? And they'll factor that in. Also, I should go back. There are 2 lines on that chart. One is for, what is it called now? People who don't know about RF and people who know about RF. There's a term, I forgot it now. Anyway, by putting signs up at your station, no, not the radioactive sign. That's not us. One like this, though, you can buy them on Amazon. This is for RF, and that then makes your station what we call a controlled. That's it, controlled area. There's uncontrolled and controlled areas. And by making your station a controlled area through signs, then there's a higher power density level that is allowed. Use fencing to keep people away, use directional antennas, and if necessary, you may have to relocate your antennas to a spot that's further away from people. That attic antenna just might not work out. Oh, more questions. So what type of radiation are radio signals?
Delta.
Yep, non-ionizing radiation. And at which of the following frequencies does maximum permissible exposure have the lowest value?
Bravo.
Yeah, 50 megahertz is a VHF, the 6-meter band. Yep. That's where the chart takes the dip. And how does the allowable power density for RF safety change if duty cycle changes from 100% to 50%?
Charlie.
Yes, it increases by a factor of 2. And what factors affect the RF exposure of people near an amateur station antenna?
Delta.
Yep, all of those.
Delta.
The frequency and power level, okay, that's pretty obvious. Distance from the antenna, yep. And the radiation pattern of the antenna. If the antenna has gain in one direction, that's also one of the inputs to the computer model that they'll ask you. So why do exposure limits vary with frequency?
Delta.
Yep, the human body absorbs more RF energy at some frequencies than at others, so VHF. And which of the following is an acceptable method to determine whether your station complies with the FCC RF exposure regulations?
Delta.
Yep, all of
Delta.
those. If you use the math that's in OET Bulletin 65, or by calculation based on computer modeling, or by measurement using calibrated equipment. So what hazard is created by touching an antenna during a transmission? Ouch!
Bravo.
Yep, you get an RF burn to the skin. You don't want that. So which of the following actions can reduce exposure to RF radiation?
Alpha.
Yes, you want to relocate the antennas. Relocating the transmitter won't do you any good. The antennas might. So how can you make sure your station stays in compliance with RF safety regulations?
Bravo.
Yep, by reevaluating the station whenever an item in the transmitter or antenna system is changed. If you go down in power, it's not going to be a problem, but if you go up in power, for sure. All right, why is duty cycle one of the factors used to determine safe RF radiation exposure levels?
Alpha.
Exactly. It affects the average exposure, averaged over time. So what is the definition of duty cycle during the averaging time for RF exposure? What's important to us?
Charlie.
Yeah, the
Charlie.
percentage of time that the transmitter is transmitting. Broadcasters, it's 100%, but for us, it's less. And how does RF radiation differ from ionizing radiation, also known as radioactivity?
Alpha.
Yes. Radioactivity can damage the DNA in the chromosomes and cells, but non-ionizing radiation has not yet been proven to do that. Some people are concerned about RF energy, especially with cell phones, but so far all the studies are that it does not have the adverse effects of radioactivity. All right, who is responsible for ensuring that no person is exposed to RF energy above the FCC exposure limits?
Bravo.
You are the station licensee. All right, mechanical safety. I think this is the last section. So one of these days you're going to put up that big tower. I haven't put up a big tower yet, but maybe. So you want to, if you're going to be climbing towers, you want to know what you're doing. So if you can, help out somebody else who's working on towers. You may not want to climb, okay, but you can be a ground crew. So get some training, learn about the safety aspects of having a tower and the responsibilities of that. You want to wear a hard hat and personal protective equipment at all times. The climber on a tower wants to be tied off to the tower with a harness and with safety ropes and belts. And we always say in Voice of America, this was a rule, the two-man rule. If you're going to work on dangerous equipment of any kind, you can't do it by yourself. You need to have two people there, if for no other reason than to call 911. But yes, the two-man rule always applies, and you want to avoid electrical power lines. So I've been very blessed to have some interesting careers, and one of the careers I had was I worked as an engineer for a television station up in Saginaw, Michigan, WNEM-TV, Channel 5, yay! And I was on the engineering staff, and one of the things that we would do on the engineering staff for the nightly news is that we got to drive and set up the live trucks, the electronic news gathering trucks that would send signals back to the station via microwave. It kind of looked like this truck that you'd see here, with the microwave antenna on a pneumatic mast. And this mast, I think ours went up 30 or 40 feet in the air, and then the antenna would fold out, and then we could point it to the broadcast tower. And on the controls we had for the pneumatic mast, we had a sign in our van, and the sign said, "Look up, stupid." Why? Look here what happened. This was a ENG van, somebody deployed out in the field. You can't see the very top, but if you look up here, you see the power lines? They didn't look up. Look at all the smoke. Look at all the charred remains.
You let a lot of smoke out.
Exactly, let a lot of smoke. That's why we say if you're going to do any antenna work at your house or in your area, know where the power lines are and make sure you can avoid them. If you're going to be putting using a bow and arrow or slingshots or other ways to fling lines up into the trees or whatnot, know where the power lines are. Look up so that you don't have a problem like this. Some towers, and this is the kind that I would kind of like to get maybe, is a tilt up, tilt over and a crank up tower. So you can tilt it down to work on antennas and then winch it back up again. And then it's kind of nested inside and it goes up to the antenna. The thing is, with any tower, you want to know the height of the tower, and you want to make sure that power lines are at least that distance away. So if it's a 50-foot tower, you want to make sure the power lines are at least 50 feet away plus 10. So 60 feet away. So power lines should be at least 60 feet away. So if the tower crashes, God forbid, it's not going to get into the power lines. And also crank up towers like we're showing here must not be climbed until they're fully retracted or they're blocked securely so that they can't guillotine down. And I use that word purposely. You may have wondered, well, okay, not all towers are these crank up type. Some are just sections of tower that are taken up vertically, and they're taken up vertically using something called a gin pole, which has got a pulley at the top with ropes, and you can actually lift tower sections up one at a time and put them on top of each other. So it's not on the test anymore, but I just thought I'd include this so that you have information about gin poles. That's how towers are up. And notice this tower is guyed. It's got guy wires up here. And when the guy wires come down to the bottom, they're secured into anchors down at the base, and they're tightened and tensioned using these, what are known as turnbuckles, which are installed originally when they're at their fully expanded position. And then this center section can be rotated to tighten or tension the guy wires. And when you're all done tensioning the guys, then you need to take a piece of wire, a specialized wire, and wrapping it through such that the turnbuckle can't loosen, can't back itself out. That's normal function of vibration from wind and things like that. You want to make sure that you tie off the turnbuckle so that it can't back out. And whatever you do, don't install your antenna on a power line. No, very high zap potential. No good. Remember, this is the safety chapter. Okay, questions? So what is required when climbing an antenna tower?
Delta.
Yep, all of these. Have sufficient training. Use appropriate tie-offs to the tower at all times with a harness. And always wear an approved climbing harness, all of those. Yep. And under what circumstances is it safe to climb a tower without a helper or observer?
Never.
Two-man rule, never. You always have somebody there with you. And which of the following is an important safety precaution to observe when putting up an antenna tower?
Charlie.
Yeah, look up, stupid. Look for and stay clear of any power lines. And you'd think, the simplest, vertical antennas, they can get you into trouble sometimes if you don't look up. All right, what is the purpose of a, safety wire through a turnbuckle used to tension guy lines?
Bravo.
Yes, it prevents loosening of the turnbuckle from vibration. And what is the minimum safe distance from a power line to allow when installing an antenna or tower?
Delta.
Yes, enough so that if the antenna falls, no part of it can come closer than 10 feet to the power lines. And which of the following is an important safety rule to remember when using a crank-up tower?
Charlie.
Yeah, this type of tower cannot be climbed unless it's retracted fully or there's locking devices that have been installed to keep it from guillotining down. All right, which is a proper grounding method for a tower?
Delta.
Yeah, we saw it earlier. Separate 8-foot ground rods for each tower leg, bonded to the tower and bonded to each other. And why should you avoid attaching an antenna to a utility pole?
So the smoke doesn't come out of you.
That's right.
Delta.
Not Delta, just Charlie. Yeah, high zap potential. They used to have a distractor answer on here that the power company would charge you extra. They took that away. All right, and ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of chapter 9. You have completed the book. That is all for us for this section. So what I would like to do right now with your occurrence, or your concurrence is what I'm trying to say. Let's take 5 minutes, have an intermission, and then come back, and together we'll take a 35-question multiple choice test. And we'll be able to go back over questions if we miss anything and whatnot. So take 5 minutes, move around, but come back with pen and paper if you would, and we'll take a practice test. See you in a bit. welcome back. Hope you had a nice break and are all rested and refreshed. And let's go ahead and take a practice test, and then I'll get you home. Oh wait, you're already home. It's an old joke, but I still love it. Okay, so we are going to go through practice test number 10. Bruce, if you take the laptop. Practice test number 10, wait, we haven't taken a practice test yet. Well, so this is the fourth time that we have given the technician class out of the 5th edition book. And every time we do the class, we go through 3 practice tests. And so 10, 11, and 12 will be from this. So there are practice tests from the previous classes that I'll make available to you in the Dropbox link. You'll have them in the folder for tomorrow. So you can use them to take practice tests. And why do I want you to take practice tests? Well, if you look here at the statistics, Bruce, if you can take me away there for a second, there's 411 questions, all right? And you're going to take a 35 question practice test. And if you had no repeats whatsoever on questions, that would mean you needed to take 11.75 practice tests to review all 411 questions. So we say that you need to take at least 12 practice tests in order to feel comfortable that, okay, I've covered the majority of the questions. So that's why we say that. And where can you take practice tests? Right here. This is what we recommend, the American Radio Relay League's review site, where you can take practice tests. And that's what we're going to do tonight. I took a practice test and captured all of the questions and answers and put them together here. So this is exactly what you would see at this website tonight. So if you would, please get out a blank sheet of paper, and we'll number it from 1 to 35. And you'll be writing down A, B, C, or D as your answer. And after we go through all 35 questions, then if there's one you'd like me to go back to, just unmute and let me know. If you're on the YouTube channel, you can put it in the chat. Just say, go back to this question if you would, and we'll do that. We'll make sure that you have no time limit when you're taking the test in reality, in person. So don't let that be a constraint. But for tonight, I'm going to be watching folks that have their cameras on. And if you do, when you're done answering a question, if you would just briefly raise your hand, that'll tell me, okay, the majority of people are done. So pencil, paper, 1 through 35, good luck. You can do it. I will not be reading the questions unless somebody asks me to, please. But when we get to the answers, I will read the question and the correct answer for those who might be visually impaired. So good luck. Here is question 1. Let me know, make sure that you can all read it, and you can get rid of me, Bruce. There you go. Here's question 1. Oh, and I will say these are the actual questions and actual answers that will be on your test. It's just the answers will be in a different order. So don't memorize A, B, C, or D. All right, I saw one hand up there. Okay. So that's question 1. Here's question 2. Alrighty, and question 3. Okay, and here is question 4. If I go too fast, just tell me slow down. Here is question 5. And here is question 6. And question 7. A lot of words, give you some time to read it. All right. And question 8. And here is question 9. And now, question 10. And question 11. And now, question 12. And question 13, this is a pictorial. What is component 9? And question 14. And next is question 15. And now question 16. And question 17. And now, question 18. And here is question 19. And here is question 20. And next is question 21. And now we have question 22. And next, 23. Now we have another pictorial. What is the function of component 2? Next is 25. And here is 26. And 27. And 28. And 29. And here is question 30. And question 31. And question 32. And question 33. Question 34. And the last question, 35. Okay, are there any questions that you'd like me to go back to? Just go ahead, if you're in the Zoom classroom, unmute and let me know. If you're on YouTube, if you go in the chat and just type in the question you'd like me to go back to. Hearing nothing and seeing nothing. Wow, that's a first. That's cool. All right.
May I ask a question?
You may.
Couple of questions.
Sure, Ted.
Safety. A couple of the questions had an answer of make sure you have a grounded wrist strap. Is there ever any reason why one would do that?
That is when you're working on solid state devices like integrated circuits to prevent static from damaging the CMOS devices in the chip or things like that. That's when you would use a grounded wrist strap. But for life safety, personal safety, no.
Okay, thank you.
All right, the question is, how did we do? Let's go back and see. Here's answer number 1. What health hazard is presented by electrical current flowing through the body? All of those. D, it may cause involuntary muscle contractions, it may cause injury, or it may disrupt the electrical functions of cells. 1D. 2, what band is best suited for communicating via meteor scatter? That's B, the 6-meter band. The wavelength is about the same as the meteor tail. 2B. 3, what is equal to 1 kilovolt? B, 1,000 volts. 3B. 4, what is the resistance of a circuit for which the applied voltage is 12 volts and the current flow is 1.5 amps? So R equals E divided by I, or 12 divided by 1.5, 8 ohms. 4A. And 5, which of the following are required for remote control operation? The control operator must be at the control point, the control operator indirectly manipulates the controls, and the control operator is required at all times that it's transmitting, so 5A. And 6, which term describes the rate at which electrical energy is used? That's B, power, 6B. And 7, with which countries are FCC licensed amateur radio stations prohibited from exchanging communications? C, any country whose administration has notified the International Telecommunications Union that it objects to such communications. 7C. And 8, which of the following can be used to enter a transceiver's operating frequency? C, the keypad, or VFO knob. 8C. And 9, what reading on an SWR meter indicates a perfect impedance match? D, 1 to 1, 1:1, 9D. 10, how soon after passing the exam for your first amateur license may you transmit? C, as soon as your operator station license grant appears in the FCC's license database. 10C. And 11, in which direction does a half-wave dipole antenna radiate the strongest signal? B, broadside to the antenna. 11B. And 12, what does the term or the abbreviation PSK mean? Phase shift keying. 12C. And 13, what is component number 9? That is D, a variable resistor. 13D. And 14, what is the formula used to calculate electrical power in a DC circuit? This is the pi. P equals I times E. 14C. And 15, what frequency range is referred to as VHF? That is the range between 30 and 300 megahertz. 15D. And 16, what method of call sign identification is required for a station transmitting phone signals? Well, you can send the call sign either using Morse code or phone emission. Send the call sign using CW or phone. 16D. And 17, what is an amateur radio station that connects other amateur stations to the internet? That's called a gateway station. 17B. And 18, what effect does multipath propagation have on data transmissions? Error rates are likely to increase. 18A. And 19, which of the following RF connector types is most suitable for frequencies above 400 megahertz? That's the type N, named after AT&T engineer Mr. Neal. 19D. And 20, what is the Amateur Radio Emergency Service, or ARES? B, a group of licensed amateurs who have voluntarily registered their qualifications and equipment for communications duty in the public service. 20B. And 21, what does the abbreviation FET stand for? That is a field effect transistor. 21D. And 22, what is a LEO satellite? That is a satellite in low Earth orbit. 22C. And 23, who is responsible for ensuring that no person is exposed to RF energy above the FCC limits? The station licensee. 23A. And 24 is another diagram. What is the function of component 2? That's a transistor, so it is to control the flow of current. 24A. And what should you do before calling CQ? Ask if the frequency is in use. Listen first to make sure no one else is using the frequency, and make sure that you're on frequency for your license class. Make sure you're operating on an authorized frequency. D, all of these choices. 25D. And 26, what is a transceiver? It's a device that combines a receiver and a transmitter in one. 26A. And 27, which of the following is a disadvantage of FM compared with single sideband? Because of the capture effect, only one signal can be received at a time. 27D. And 28, Which agency regulates and enforces the rules for the amateur radio service in the United States? If you don't get this one, I'm going to be mad. The FCC, 28D. And 29, what function is performed with a transceiver and a digital mode hotspot? We probably didn't cover this as well as we should, but with digital mode transceivers, it's communication using digital voice or data via the internet via this hotspot. Try to do better next time. 29A. And 30, why are simplex channels designated in the VHF-UHF band plans? So stations within range of each other can communicate without tying up a repeater. 30B. And 31, which of the following is an important safety precaution to observe when putting up an antenna tower? Look for and stay clear of any overhead electrical lines. 31B. 32, which of the following types of solder should not be used for radio and electronic applications? That's acid core solder. Used to be used for plumbing. It'll eat through the printed circuit boards, so 32C. And 33, what electrical component is typically constructed as a coil of wire? That's an inductor, 33B. And 34, which amateur band includes 146.52 megahertz? That's 2 meters, 34A. And finally, 35, which of the following actions should you take if a neighbor tells you that your station's transmissions are interfering with their radio or TV reception? Well, B, make sure your station is functioning properly and that it does not cause interference to your own radio and TV when it's tuned to the same channel. Check your own stuff first and then go over and help him out with his bad F connectors, 35B. So the question is, did you have 26 correct? If you did, you passed. I want to thank you very much for your attention. We're going to do this very same thing next week with 2 more practice tests if you'd like. Some folks are testing though this weekend. I want to say good luck to you. You can do it. Just review, do some practice tests, look for the PDF practice tests I'll put in the folder on Dropbox tomorrow. And if you've enjoyed this class, please tell others about it. It really helps. And if you're of a mind to donate cash, we can use it. We'd appreciate it. There is a donate link. Oops, I don't have my laser pointer on. Hang on a second. There we go. Right here on my website, w4eey.com, there's a PayPal donate link, and any amount would be appreciated, or YouTube has super thanks. That also works as well. Any monies received go toward the production of future classes. And we will be having another technician class. You won't need it, but another technician class starting in February, and then also the general class. We'll have one of those starting in February as well. So I just want to thank you for being a great class. Any comments or questions before we go tonight? Let me turn off the spotlight here on Zoom. I wore you all out. All right.
Thank you, Gary.
Let your brains cool down. Appreciate you. If you want, come on back next week. We'll see you then. Until, see you on the bands. 73.
73. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, Gary.
You can do it.